Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. And I'm so excited to be here with all of you and on this Saturday night, and for me to get to just introduce myself, share my story, and share my testimony of how through the darkest of circumstances, I was able to find light through my faith in Christ. And He taught me truly what it means to walk by faith and not by sight. So as you already heard, I am a West Georgia native. I grew up in Bowden, but I was born in Carrollton. I went to school in Carrollton, but I'm a country girl at heart. I was raised out on about 80 acres of pastures and woods and farmland, and I absolutely loved every minute of it. I grew up very independent. I was always outside running around with my dogs, usually for company. Every now and then my brother and sister would venture out there with me, but usually it was just me and my dog. And my family, they are some of the best people in the world, I have to say. As you heard, I have an older brother and sister. I'm the youngest, so that might be the reason I was kind of headstrong growing up, a little bit stubborn. I like to say independent because I think it sounds nicer, but I think they wouldn't be as kind. But my parents, who are with me tonight, Rick and Sally, they've always supported me and my brother and sister in everything that we've done. And as we grew up, I remember going on so many wonderful trips, having so many traditions and wonderful memories that I'm so thankful for. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I found my true passion in life. My mom signed me and my sister up for a week-long summer horse camp, and I think she did it more as a way to just get us out of the house for a week during the summer, out of her hair. But little did she know that week-long commitment would soon turn into a lifelong commitment, because I absolutely loved it. My sister did too. I loved getting to learn how to take care of the animals and groom them. I loved the farm work. I even loved mucking out the stalls, which I know is weird, but I especially loved learning how to ride them. And so after that week of horse camp, I immediately started begging my parents to let me take lessons. And then after that, I started begging to be able to compete in horse shows. And then after that, I started begging for my own pony. So it all just kind of spiraled out of control from there. But I continued to ride horses throughout my childhood and into high school, where I was also a member of the Carrollton High School marching band. I played the saxophone. And when I was a senior in high school, I actually made it onto the Berry College equestrian team through an early tryout process. So when I finally graduated high school in 2012, I was so excited, and I immediately remember going to Target and starting buying all of my dorm room stuff, and I was just ready. I was ready to start this next chapter of my life. So the 3 years that I spent in Berry College were some of the best of my life, or so I thought at the time. I made a lot of friends, both on and off the team. I loved exploring the beautiful campus. If you've ever been there, you know it's absolutely gorgeous. And there's literally thousands of acres of farmland and pastures and woods and all the deer roaming around. And I also loved my classes, even though I probably didn't study as much as I should have. And I was very successful on the equestrian team, placing second in the nation my freshman year and third in the nation my sophomore year. And I would later go on to graduate, finally, from the University of West Georgia with my degree in psychology in 2019. But my story really begins in May of 2015, when I was still a junior at Berry College. So that month, I had just finished up my finals of my junior year, and I was looking forward to spending the summer on campus. I was going to work at the horse barn on campus, and I was going to get a lot of practice in riding and take a few summer classes, but my main goal was to get ready for my senior season on the equestrian team. I was bound and determined to make it to nationals once again and finally earn that blue ribbon this time. But before I could start all these plans, I had one little thing that I had to take care of first. So on May 5th of 2015, I woke up in my childhood bedroom. I had driven home the day before, and I woke up early that morning, and my mom drove me into town to the hospital where I was admitted to have my tonsils taken out. Now, I had all my life suffered from very large, angry tonsils that would get infected all the time. So I had chronic tonsillitis, it felt like, pretty much constantly. And finally, when I was 20 years old, I decided I had had enough and I would get them taken out. Looking back, this is one of those decisions where you think, okay, I probably could have lived with that chronic tonsillitis, but if I had known then what I know now. You know, we think that a lot, and we've all had times where we experience that feeling. So after the surgery, I was discharged and sent home. And my mother, being the loving, doting mother that she is, actually made the decision to sleep with me that night. And again, it's one of those decisions that you look back on and you question, but this decision we were grateful for. It was an insignificant, spur-of-the-moment decision that ultimately saved my life. It's the reason I'm able to stand here and tell you this story today. My mom woke up at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and she decided since she was in the room with me, she would try to wake me up and make sure I wasn't in too much pain and see if I needed some water. But when she tried to wake me up, she discovered me completely unresponsive. And she started shaking me, saying my name over and over again, trying to wake me up, and I just wouldn't wake up. She yelled for my dad, who, after taking one look at me, called for an ambulance. I was rushed back to the hospital, where immediately I was intubated and placed on a ventilator. At that point, all my family could do was wait. They didn't know if I was going to wake up at all. And if I did wake up, they didn't know if I would be able to walk or talk or think or do anything independently ever again. Later, they would find out that if 30 more minutes had passed, if my mom had slept for 30 more minutes, or if she had woken up and decided just to go back to sleep, I wouldn't have made it at all. So the next day, after I was put on the ventilator for the night, the breathing tube was taken out, and I started to breathe on my own. Everybody started to celebrate, thinking, okay, she's made it through this hurdle. She's going to be fine. Everything is going to be okay. But as I began to talk and regain consciousness, that celebration soon ended, because one of the first things I said was to my dad, who happens to be an eye doctor, and I told him that I couldn't see anything and everything was completely black. So once again, I was loaded into an ambulance and rushed to a different hospital where more tests and scans and blood work was done. And at this point, I was beginning to kind of come out of that fog that the trauma and the medication had caused, and starting to talk a little bit more. And there was a lot of family and friends who were visiting and calling to check on me. So there was one day in the hospital that my mom handed me the phone, and I don't remember who was on the other end. I think it was an aunt or some family member. But when she handed me the phone and I held it up to my ear, that little stubborn side of me started to come out, and I kind of sassed to her a little bit because I couldn't hear anybody on the other end, and I couldn't understand why she would give me the phone if nobody was there. So we went back and forth, me insisting that nobody was on the other line, her insisting that, yes, somebody was on the other line. And finally, in a very dramatic huff, I switched the phone from my left ear to my right ear. And all of a sudden, I could hear that voice loud and clear. So that's how we found out that in addition to losing sight in both of my eyes, I had also completely lost hearing in my left ear. So So after 2 weeks in the hospital, I was getting ready to go home when one of my clearest memories from the hospital occurred. And I don't remember much my hospital stay, but I do remember this. And I don't know how my sister convinced the nurses to let me be taken outside of the hospital to greet my two very dirty, very country farm dogs that she had packed up from Bowden and driven all the way to Atlanta. But in a world that all of a sudden was so unfamiliar, it was so wonderful for me to sink my fingers into their familiar fur as I was covered with kisses and tail wags. And that's the pleasant, clearest memory I have from the hospital stays before I truly started to realize how much my life had changed. So after those 2 weeks, I was discharged. I was sent home. And so once again, I found myself returning to my childhood home. But this time, instead of returning as a carefree college student with her whole life ahead of her, I was returning as somebody with a disability who had no idea how to move forward. And needless to say, the next few days and weeks and even months were spent in a lot of grief. I couldn't understand how my life, which had been so normal and so familiar 1 second, had been completely changed into something so unfamiliar and so scary the next. And I also felt isolated. I had spent 20 years with sight, and all of a sudden I was cut off from all that visual stimulation. So I felt cut off from the world, but I also felt cut off from the people around me who, in my head, couldn't really understand what I was going through. And my family and I, we had never met somebody who was blind. And all of a sudden, we were all living with it. So we had no idea what to do. Thankfully, though, I was raised on a very firm Christian foundation. So my childhood, I remember growing up in Sunday school. And as I got older, going to sing in the youth choir and going to all the youth retreats. But somewhere along the way, I lost touch with that personal relationship with Christ. And that's what was missing for me in 2015 when all of this happened. But I did have that foundation to fall back on. So when I was faced with this situation where I didn't know what to do, I relied on that Sunday school answer of, well, what do you do when you don't know how to move forward? Oh, well, you pray. And for me, it was, that mystical, okay, I pray and everything's going to be okay. So at the beginning, that's what I did. I just prayed for healing. And I remember going to bed each night and I would say, okay, God, when I wake up, just let me be able to see. And that's all I would say. And then I would go to sleep. And at the same time, we were taking a lot of trips for healing. My dad is, a normal dad. He wants to fix everything. So he made it his life mission to bring my sight back. And he's also an eye doctor. So it was his professional mission as well. So he started researching all of these treatments and doctors and medicines that could bring my sight back. And one of the first trips we took was all the way to Beijing, China. And to say we were a few fish out of water would be an understatement. We were completely out of our comfort zone. We got to the medical center, and I'm not exaggerating when I say absolutely nobody spoke English. So we couldn't really communicate with these people very well, and it came with a few funny stories that came out of that lack of communication. One of them is that we were there for 3 weeks, and I think for the first 2 weeks, we washed all of our clothes by hand, and then we would hang them out to dry on the balcony before somebody was finally able to, I think, maybe drag my mom to the laundry room and show her that they actually did have washers and dryers in Beijing, China, which I don't know why we thought they wouldn't, but we did all of our clothes by hand for the first couple of weeks. The second thing that was kind of funny to us was the food situation. So I was pretty excited because, we've all had good Chinese food over here. So I was like, oh yeah, we're going to get to try some different stuff. And once we got settled into the medical center, we found out that there was somebody who would come around each day and take our food orders and bring us our food. So when we got the menu the very first day, we were offered McDonald's. So it was kind of a letdown there a little bit. And once we finally got brave enough to try to cook our own food, my mom and my sister would venture to the grocery store. I think we tried once, and again, my mom, she kind of almost set the place on fire a little bit, trying to make some grilled cheese. So we just settled with the McDonald's the rest of the time. But all jokes aside, it was a very enlightening experience. We got to meet some people from all over the world who had traveled there. But my treatments, they were pretty scary because, as I said, nobody could speak English. Nobody could communicate with me very well. And when I was taken back to the treatment room, my family couldn't go with me. So I would go back there, and I'll never forget the very first treatment. I went back there, and the nurses and the doctors, they were nice. You could tell they were trying to comfort me, but without those words, it was very difficult. And as I was laying there, not knowing what was about to happen, inexplicitly, I pictured in my head that church I had grown up in. And I could see the stained glass, I could see the choir up there, and I could hear them singing Amazing Grace. And I think at that point, the doctor and the nurse probably thought I was crazy because I started to sing it. And it just started flowing from my lips, and all of a sudden I felt comforted. And that refrain that we all knew, that's what got me through those next 3 weeks in China when there was so much discomfort and unfamiliarity. And that is a lesson that I took with me as I went home back to the United States. And I would go on other treatments over the next few months and several years. We went to Germany, we went to Florida, Nashville, all over Atlanta, just searching for different doctors who could give us some hope. And while all of the treatments were different, they all have had the same result. They didn't work. And the disappointment that came with getting my hopes up for every treatment and coming home and still not being able to see, and the disappointment of saying that prayer each night and waking up and still being faced with darkness became almost too much to bear. And this is the point in my story where I think a lot of people would have given up on God. And honestly, I don't know what kept me from getting to that point. I don't know what kept me from saying, God's not listening, he's not there, he doesn't care. But I'm so thankful that I just kept praying. And this is what taught me the true power of prayer. It's not that my prayers were answered in the way that I was saying them, but it's what came afterwards. So I've never been very good being vulnerable. I don't like to admit my weaknesses or what I'm struggling with. So when I was faced with blindness, I didn't like talking about it to other people, especially my family, because I felt that guilt for seeing what my pain was doing to them. So I started to keep it kind of all bottled up inside. But as my prayers got a little longer, I started, in addition to praying for healing, I would just pray for comfort and peace and strength to be able to deal with my day-to-day. And all of a sudden, I started seeing that play out in my own life. I started to see God giving me that comfort and that strength just with the little hardships that I would face with my everyday struggle with blindness. And with that, my prayers kept getting longer each day because I saw God showing up, and I I saw him providing me with those things. So I started to form this relationship with Christ, and I started to see that I could be completely vulnerable with him, guilt-free. And it was like something I had really never experienced before, because I had never talked to God that way. I had never opened up to him that way or poured my heart out to him in that way. And my favorite Bible verse, it comes from James chapter 1. And it says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when you face trials of any kind, consider it an opportunity for pure joy. For when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow." And that is exactly what I saw happening to me. As my faith grew, as my relationship with Christ grew stronger, my endurance, my ability to deal with my blindness grew as well. And it was something that showed me, okay, maybe my prayers are being answered. Maybe I'm being healed, not physically, but in a different way. You see, I had wanted that physical healing because I thought it was the only way for me to be able to deal with this. I thought, I need my problems to go away. I need that physical healing. But God wanted that spiritual healing so that I would learn to rely on him in the midst of those trials. And that's exactly what was happening as my prayer life grew and my relationship with Christ grew out of that. And so with this spiritual healing that was happening, I started to think all sorts of thoughts. And I thought, okay, there's a reason I'm still here. There's a reason my mom woke up when she did. There's a reason why the damage I suffered wasn't more extensive. So I started to ask God, okay, how can I move forward? How can I use this situation that I'm in and live for you and still live a successful, productive life? And so with this new relationship with Christ and with this new outlook, I embarked on a whole new journey. And this new journey, I know it was a God thing because it was completely crazy. But I remember very vividly, I was laying in bed one day. That's what I did the first few months after my sight loss. I just kind of slept and laid in bed and woke up to a home-cooked breakfast every morning. It was really nice. I kind of miss those days. But I was feeling sorry for myself, quite honestly. I was thinking about all of my friends back at school who were starting classes, and here I was back in my parents' house doing nothing. When all of a sudden the thought came into my head, well, why can't I go back to school? And I honestly thought, I remember thinking, there's nothing stopping me. When I was laying there blind, partially deaf, with no skills as somebody with this disability, but I thought there was nothing stopping me from going back to school. So I remember going downstairs and announcing to my parents that I wanted to go back to Berry College and I wanted to finish college. And I heard crickets. I didn't hear a word. And I thought to myself, okay, because this had happened a couple times since losing my sight, and I was learning, before I start talking, always make sure there's actually somebody in the room, because you don't like to talk to an empty room. It's not a good feeling. But I kind of stood there for a minute, and they were there. They were just silently trying to, I think, get over their shock and their little mini heart attacks they were having. And my parents have never been the type to hold us back. And this carried over to when I lost my sight as well. As soon as I came home from the hospital, my mom already had me a white cane. And when people told my parents that I shouldn't go back upstairs to the bedroom I was used to because it would be too dangerous, they said, no, she can walk upstairs. So they've always believed in me, whether it's been the small things or the big things. So as soon as I had this idea of going back to school, they said, okay, well, let's start figuring out what you need to know. So I started learning all these new things in order to be an independent and successful college student. So the first thing I had to learn was how to walk with a white cane. And this was, to this day, this has been the most challenging thing. It still is the most challenging thing. I remember the very first mobility lesson that I had. the trainer, they're called orientation and mobility trainers, and she taught me how to use my cane, how to slide it across the ground, and how to go up and down stairs safely and all of that. And then she took me outside and she directed me to walk a path that I had walked so many times before. It's from my house, my parents' house, to the pool. And I got so lost and so confused, and it was so frustrating. And she taught me in that lesson how to use my ears and how to listen for the sound of the pool, how to orient my body so that I would travel towards that sound. And that laid the foundation for when you get in trouble, just stop and listen. And so moving on from that, I started going to Berry College and had mobility lessons there and started learning how to get from my dorm building to my classrooms. I had to learn how to cross the street. So I had to learn how to listen to traffic and know if they're going perpendicular or parallel so that I would know when it's safe to cross, which I'm still not, 100% comfortable doing, but I haven't been hit yet, so I say I'm doing pretty good so far. I've actually been to Michigan for training where I had to cross 4 lanes of traffic, so that was terrifying. The other thing I had to learn was Braille. So that took about 1.5 years to learn, and I'm so glad I learned it because I use it every day. I have my house, all my appliances labeled in Braille. I have what's called a Braille display where I can read electronic Braille books. So that's really nice. And then the third thing I had to learn was technology. So I had to have a way to do my schoolwork and research and write papers and all of that. So there's this software called a screen reader. And you can get a screen reader either on your laptop or on your iPhone. And what it does is it basically reads the screen out to me, but I had to learn different keyboard commands on the laptop and then different commands with my fingers on my iPhone in order to work the screen reader. So actually, there was nobody who could teach me this. The person who was supposed to, he said, well, I know how to turn on the screen reader, but that's all I know. So that was very helpful. So my sister, she actually looked up YouTube videos, and she would learn how to use it, and then she would teach me. So that was a big support, and we had a lot of frustrating times, but after just 8 months after losing my sight, I returned to Berry College, and I was able to walk to class by myself, do my schoolwork by myself, and I mean, it was a huge accomplishment for me, but it didn't come without its challenges. I remember one day I decided to go for a walk between classes, and so I went out of my dorm room and I started walking down the little walking path that I had learned, and I got about 10 minutes in and I started to turn around and walk back, and after a few minutes I realized that I wasn't hearing anything, which wasn't a good sign because I should have been right beside a pretty busy road. You know, Berry College, it's never really that busy. It's not that big of a campus, but it was at a time where a lot of students should have been driving around, and so I thought, okay, this isn't good. I don't hear anything. So I realized that I was lost. And I started to panic a little bit, but I reached back and I thought about that lesson I had learned in that very first mobility lesson to just stop and listen. So I stopped and listened and I didn't hear anything, so I thought, okay, God, help me out. And all of a sudden I just saw my mom's face in my mind, and I thought, oh God, not her. I can't give her a heart attack today, but I didn't have anywhere else to turn. I couldn't hear any people. I didn't know what to do. So I took out my phone and I FaceTimed my mom. And after she recovered from her little panic attack, when I said, Mom, I'm lost, I was able to hold up the phone, and she guided me through FaceTime back to my dorm room. And I really wasn't that far off my path, but it was just enough for me to not know how to get back. So that was kind of a story that after a few days we started to laugh at. And then the other hard part of going back to school was just the social part of it. And I remember the very first time I went out to eat with a group of my friends, I was so excited to hang out with them again, and we went to one of our most favorite restaurants, and I ordered the salmon, and I was excited when my food came. I was going to cut up my food and navigate my plate independently, just like I had practiced. And I went to put a big bite of what I expected to be salmon into my mouth when I realized that I had just put a whole lemon, peel and all, into my mouth. And at the eruption of nervous laughter, I knew that my friends had been watching all this unfold, and nobody knew whether they should say anything or if they should just let it happen. And I was mortified. And I mean, it's funny now, but in that moment, I was like, oh, this is so embarrassing. And it was situations like that where people felt really uncomfortable around me. They didn't really know what to say or what to do. They didn't want to offend me. That kind of made me start to isolate myself from group settings because I was so tired of trying to make people feel comfortable around me. And so that first semester back at school was really lonely. I isolated myself, and then there was also a lot of people who didn't really come around me because, like I said, they didn't know how to interact with me anymore. So at the same time, I was still grieving. I was not even a year into my blindness. And so I had this new tool in my tool belt that is the only way that I got through that first semester back at school. And that was that new relationship with Christ that I have forged. And it is the reason I got through all of those valleys. It's the reason that I get through every valley I face today, because even now, almost 6 years after losing my sight, I still have bad days. I have bad weeks. I have bad months where I just get so tired of waking up and being in darkness. But what I've realized through relying on Christ through those dark days is that each time I face a hardship, I seem to learn something new about His power and His mercy and grace and love. And above all else, that is what I hope my testimony shows. I hope it shows that even in hard times, we can always find blessings and we can always find light through Christ. And before I lost my sight, when people would tell me stories like mine, stories of pain and trauma, I would say, I can't even relate. I've never gone through anything bad in my life. And I know now when I tell my story, there's always somebody who thinks that. But after the year we've all just been through, nobody can say that anymore. We've all been through unimaginable pain. And I hope we all realize now, think back over the past year. It's been hard, but I'm sure you can pick out little blessings that happened all along the way. And that's been the past 6 years of my life. It's been darkness every day. It's been a new challenge every day. But it's also been an opportunity for God to show up every day and for Him to bless me in a different way, just by getting me through those hardships. And today, 6 years later, I'm proud to say, but I always hate saying the word proud because I didn't get here by my own accomplishments. It's all by God working through me. But I did finally graduate college in 2019. I'm a professional speaker. I have one book out and one in the process. I have a monthly radio show, a podcast, a blog, a ministry, and I never thought I would be here 6 years ago. It's amazing how God can take even the hardest things and turn them into all for His glory. Just through embracing this new path, through God's strength, I found this goal of wanting to share with others how I walk by faith, wanting to motivate others to find light in all circumstances as they trust God all along the way. And thankfully, I haven't been alone in my journey. I have wonderful family and friends who have supported me, but I also have some very generous sponsors who have supported my ministry and God's call on my life. And I hope after hearing my story, you will follow me as well and keep up with God, what God continues to do. You can go to saraclaudia.com and sign up for my email list, and you can also follow me on social media at Sara Claudia Ministries. But thank you guys so much for coming out on this Saturday and listening to me, just a few of my stories. I have so many, but I hope it's encouraged you to look for God in all situations and always try to find the light. Thank you so much.